Before we begin, feel free to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps bring more soothing stories your way. Let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. James Wilson leaned heavily on his cane as he walked through the grocery store, his knees aching with each step. At 82 years old, the retired school teacher had learned to live with the slow erosion of his body. What he hadn't grown accustomed to was the suffocating weight of financial insecurity. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as James navigated the aisles. He examined prices with a sharp eye, selecting only the bare necessities: milk, bread, a small bag of apples. He lingered over a carton of eggs but eventually placed it back on the shelf. His Social Security check had stretched as far as it could this month, and even small indulgences felt like luxuries he couldn't afford. James approached the checkout counter, his heart heavy. He had calculated the total in his head but knew he was cutting it close. The cashier, a young woman with a kind face, began scanning his items. The beep of the scanner was steady, almost like a countdown. "That'll be $38.57, she said with a polite smile. James's hand trembled as he reached into his pocket for his worn leather wallet. Pulling out a crumpled collection of bills, he carefully smoothed them out on the counter. $23, he fumbled for the few coins he had, which brought the total to $27. His throat tightened as he realized he was $11.57 short. I'm sorry, James stammered, his voice barely audible. "I'll need to put some things back." He gestured toward the apples and the milk, his embarrassment searing into his cheeks. Before the cashier could respond, a man's voice interrupted from behind. "No need for that. I've got it." James turned to see a tall man in his early 50s with sharp features, casual clothes, and a calm, confident demeanor. His voice carried a kindness that was rare but genuine. The man stepped forward, pulling out a sleek black wallet. "You don't have to do that," James said, his pride warring with his gratitude. "I want to," the man replied simply. He handed the cashier his card, paying for the entire bill with a swipe and a nod. James stared at the stranger, his mind grappling with the unexpected act of generosity. "Thank you," he managed to say, his voice hoarse with emotion. "I don't even know your name." "Elon," the man said, offering a handshake. "Elon Musk." James's brow furrowed slightly. He had heard the name before. On the news, perhaps? Something about space and cars. But in this moment, he wasn't looking at a billionaire or a tech mogul. He was looking at a man who had extended a hand when he desperately needed it. "Well, Mr. Musk," James said, his voice steadying, "you've done more for me today than I can say. Thank you." "It's nothing," Elon said with a small smile. "Everyone needs a little help sometimes." The two exchanged a few pleasantries before parting ways, James clutching his grocery bag as if it contained far more than milk and bread. He walked out into the crisp evening air, the sun dipping low on the horizon. For James, the encounter was a rare moment of grace in a world that often felt indifferent. For Elon, it was a fleeting but profound reminder of the power of small gestures. Neither man realized the encounter would ripple far beyond the walls of that modest grocery store, sparking a journey neither could have anticipated. James Wilson returned home with the groceries, his thoughts swirling around the stranger who had come to his aid. His house, a modest bungalow with peeling paint and sagging shutters, was a place filled with memories of better days. As he stepped inside, the familiar scent of old books and worn wood greeted him. He set the groceries down on the kitchen counter, his hands lingering on the bag as if grounding himself in the reality of the day's events. The encounter with Elon Musk had been brief, but it had shaken something loose in James. He had always been a man of principle, priding himself on his independence. Growing up during the tail end of the Great Depression, he had learned to work hard and make do with what little he had. Accepting help, even in his twilight years, felt foreign, almost shameful. James sat at his worn oak kitchen table, a relic of his late wife, Margaret. She had bought it at a yard sale decades ago, insisting it was too beautiful to leave behind. The surface was now scratched and uneven, but James couldn't part with it. Margaret's absence was still a hollow ache, despite the years that had passed since her death. Opening the bag, he began unpacking the groceries. The milk and bread seemed ordinary enough, but the apples were a luxury. As he held one in his hand, its smooth surface catching the fading sunlight streaming through the window, James felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. It wasn't just the act of kindness that lingered in his mind. It was the way Elon had offered help without hesitation, without judgment. In a world that often felt divided and cold, it was a reminder that humanity still held the capacity for goodness. That evening, after a simple dinner of toast and tea, James sat down to write a letter. His handwriting, once neat and precise from years of grading papers, was now a little shaky but still legible. Dear Sir, I hope this letter finds you well. You may not remember me. I'm the old man you helped today at the grocery store. Your kindness meant more to me than I can say. It's rare to encounter such generosity these days, and I want you to know how much I appreciated it. I've spent most of my life trying to help others, as a teacher and as a father, and I've never been very good at being on the receiving end of help. But your act of kindness reminded me that sometimes it's okay to lean on others. If there's ever a way I can repay you, even in some small measure, please let me know. Thank you for showing me that even in these difficult times, there are still good people in the world. Sincerely, James Wilson. James sealed the letter and placed it in an envelope. The next day, he would return to the grocery store and leave it with the cashier, hoping it might find its way to the man who had stepped in during his moment of need. As he prepared for bed that night, James felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a glimmer of hope. He had spent years feeling as though the world had passed him by, that his small acts of goodness during his lifetime had been swallowed up by a tide of indifference. But now he wondered, could one small act of kindness truly ripple outward and create change? Could it inspire others to do the same? He didn't know, but for the first time in years, he was willing to believe it might. Elon Musk sat in the back seat of a sleek, unassuming sedan as it wound through the quiet streets of the small town. The rhythmic hum of the electric engine filled the silence, a stark contrast to the mental noise in his head. It had been a long day filled with meetings at a local research facility, and the world's demands felt heavier than usual. When his assistant handed him a plain white envelope earlier that morning, he almost set it aside with the rest of the correspondence that often piled up. But something about the handwritten address caught his eye. To Mr. Elon Musk, the kind man from the grocery store. Curious, he opened it immediately, and as he read James Wilson's letter, a wave of unexpected emotion washed over him. It wasn't the words themselves, though they were heartfelt, but the sincerity behind them. In his world of billion-dollar deals and global headlines, authenticity was rare. The next day, unable to shake the feeling that this letter deserved more than a polite reply, Elon found himself back in the small town, standing on the creaky front porch of James Wilson's home. The old man answered the door, his cane in hand and surprise lighting his face. Mr. Musk, James said, his voice laced with disbelief, I didn't expect to see you again. I wasn't sure I'd come, Elon admitted, offering a small smile. But your letter, it felt like it deserved a conversation. James stepped aside, gesturing for Elon to come in. The billionaire entered the modest home, noting the well-worn furniture, the faded wallpaper, and the framed photos that lined the mantel. It was a home filled with history, a stark contrast to Elon's sleek, futuristic lifestyle. They sat down at the kitchen table, the same one where James had written the letter. The sunlight streaming through the window cast a warm glow over the scene. I hope I didn't intrude, Elon began. Not at all, James said, pouring tea into mismatched cups. I didn't expect a man like you to think twice about an old fellow like me. Elon chuckled softly. A man like me? You mean a rich guy? James's cheeks flushed. I didn't mean it like that. Just someone who's got the world at his fingertips. For the first time in a long while, Elon found himself speaking candidly. You'd be surprised how isolating that can be. People don't really see you. They see what you represent. Money, success, influence. But none of that feels real when you meet someone like you. Someone who reminds you what life is supposed to be about. James sat back in his chair, surprised by Elon's vulnerability. Life's about people, he said after a moment. That's something I've always believed. People helping each other, looking out for one another. That's what makes it all worth it. Their conversation flowed easily after that. James spoke about his decades as a teacher, the struggles his students faced, particularly the Black and Latino kids who often dealt with poverty and systemic hurdles. He described the heartbreak of watching bright, capable students fall through the cracks of a society that didn't value them equally. I used to think if I just worked hard enough, if I just cared enough, I could make a difference, James said, his voice tinged with regret. But the system's too big, too broken. Elon listened intently, his mind racing. He had built his career on tackling big problems: space exploration, renewable energy, artificial intelligence. Yet here was a challenge just as vast, just as critical, a system that left so many behind. What if we could do something about it? Elon asked, his eyes lighting up with the spark of an idea. James raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? I mean, what if we started small? Something that helps people like you, people struggling under the weight of debt or poverty? What if we focused on addressing the inequities you've been talking about? Healthcare, education, systemic racism. James leaned forward, his hands gripping the edges of the table. That sounds like a dream, but dreams cost money, and they take more than good intentions to make real change. Elon smiled. I think I can handle the money part, but I'll need your help with the rest. For a long moment, James stared at the billionaire, searching his face for any sign of insincerity. All he saw was determination. Finally, he nodded, a glimmer of hope sparking in his chest. Well, Mr. Musk, James said, his voice steady, if you're serious, let's see what we can do. That day, an unlikely partnership was born, one built on kindness, shared purpose, and a desire to create something bigger than themselves. Neither man knew just how far their efforts would reach, but they were willing to take the first step together. The idea took shape faster than either James or Elon had anticipated. Over the next few weeks, they worked tirelessly, bouncing ideas back and forth over countless cups of tea at James's kitchen table. Elon, with his team of assistants and advisors, quickly mobilized resources, while James offered wisdom born from a lifetime of teaching and witnessing the challenges of ordinary people. Their project was no longer just an idea, it was becoming a movement. The focus was clear from the beginning. They would start by addressing medical debt, a burden that disproportionately affected low-income families in communities of color. James shared stories of former students whose families had been crushed under the weight of hospital bills, brilliant young minds forced to abandon their dreams to help their parents make ends meet. Those stories weren't statistics to him, they were lives he had known and cared about. Elon listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions. He was struck by the depth of James's understanding and the way he framed the issue not just as a financial problem, but as a moral one. People shouldn't have to choose between seeing a doctor and putting food on the table, James said one afternoon, his voice tinged with quiet anger. It's not right, and it's not just the money. It's what it does to people's dignity, their hope. Elon nodded, his jaw tightening. We'll start with debt relief, but we'll need to go deeper. Fixing the system is a long game, but if we can buy people time, give them some breathing room, that's a start. Their initial efforts focused on creating a foundation that would identify and purchase medical debt at a fraction of its original value, an established but underutilized strategy. For every dollar the foundation spent, it could erase $10 of debt, freeing families from financial bondage. It was an elegant and scalable approach, but James insisted it wasn't enough. Debt relief is only part of the solution, he argued one evening. We need to educate people, advocate for change. We need to show the world why this matters. Elon agreed, and soon the foundation's mission expanded. They partnered with community organizations and advocacy groups to address the systemic roots of medical inequities. Programs were developed to provide financial literacy training, help families navigate healthcare systems, and amplify voices calling for policy reform. As word of the initiative spread, support poured in. Philanthropists, healthcare professionals, and activists joined the cause, inspired by the unlikely partnership between a billionaire entrepreneur and a retired schoolteacher. The media picked up the story, painting it as a feel-good tale of compassion and innovation. But not everyone was on board. Critics emerged, accusing Elon of using the project as a PR stunt to distract from controversies surrounding his companies. Others questioned whether James, a white man, was the right face for a project addressing disparities that disproportionately affected communities of color. James faced the criticism with quiet resolve. He knew the project wasn't about him. and he refused to let the noise distract from their work. Still, it stung. One evening, he confided in Elon, "Maybe they're right. Maybe I shouldn't be the one doing this." Elon shook his head firmly. "No one else could have started this with me. You bring authenticity that I don't. People trust you because you've lived this, James. And if we're going to make real change, we need that." Encouraged, James pressed on, throwing himself into the work with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He spent hours visiting local churches, community centers, and schools, listening to people's stories and learning from their experiences. He made sure their voices shaped the foundation's efforts, ensuring the work was grounded in the realities of those it aimed to help. Through it all, James and Elon developed a deep respect for one another. Elon admired James's humility and moral clarity, while James was continually surprised by Elon's genuine commitment to the cause. Despite their vastly different backgrounds, they found common ground in their shared belief that change was possible, even in a world so deeply fractured. Their work began to show results. Families received letters informing them that their medical debts had been erased. Single mothers wept with relief. Elderly couples found themselves able to pay for medications they had been rationing. And perhaps most importantly, the initiative sparked conversations about the broader systems that allowed such inequities to persist. One afternoon, James received a letter from a young woman named Rosa, whose family's debt had been cleared. "For the first time in years, my mom is sleeping through the night," Rosa wrote. "She says it feels like she can breathe again. Thank you for giving us our lives back." James read the letter aloud to Elon, his voice thick with emotion. "This," he said, holding the paper tightly, "this is why we keep going." Elon nodded, his expression serious. "We've started something here, James. Something bigger than us." Neither of them could have predicted how far the ripple effect of their work would reach, but both knew they were just getting started. As the initiative gained traction, it became a national sensation. Media outlets ran features on the story of the unlikely partnership between Elon Musk and James Wilson, the billionaire and the retired teacher working together to erase medical debt and tackle systemic inequality. Donations poured in from philanthropists and ordinary citizens alike, and testimonials from families whose lives had been transformed began to circulate online. But with attention came scrutiny. The criticisms started small, a few op-eds questioning the motivations behind the initiative. Some accused Elon of using the project to clean up his public image, citing controversies surrounding his company's labor practices and environmental impacts. Others suggested James was being used as a convenient figurehead, a token symbol of grassroots credibility for a billionaire's vanity project. Then more pointed criticisms emerged. Activists on social media raised concerns about why a white man, even one as well-intentioned as James, was at the forefront of an initiative addressing racial and economic inequities. Some questioned whether the effort truly centered the voices of those most affected by these systemic issues. The backlash reached a boiling point during a live television interview. James and Elon appeared together to discuss the project's progress, but the conversation quickly turned confrontational. "Mr. Wilson," the host began, her tone sharp, "some have criticized this initiative as paternalistic. A wealthy white billionaire and a retired white teacher deciding they know what's best for marginalized communities. What do you say to those who argue this isn't your story to tell?" James shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his cane resting against his leg. He had expected tough questions, but the directness of this one caught him off guard. "I understand the criticism," he said slowly, "and I don't pretend to have lived the experiences of the people this initiative is meant to help. But I've spent my life as a teacher, watching students, many of them Black and Latino, struggle against a system stacked against them. I've seen their brilliance and potential go unrealized because of barriers they shouldn't have had to face. This isn't about me, it's about them." The host pressed further. "But doesn't their absence at the forefront of this initiative undermine its credibility?" Before James could respond, Elon leaned forward, his voice steady but firm. "We agree that the people most affected should be leading the charge. That's why we're actively partnering with community leaders, activists, and organizations to ensure this isn't just our vision, it's theirs. James and I may have started this, but the goal has always been to create something bigger than ourselves. The tension in the room was palpable, and while the response earned praise from some, the criticisms persisted. James returned home that evening feeling defeated. He sat on his porch, the twilight casting long shadows across the yard. Doubts swirled in his mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was just a relic of a bygone era, out of touch with the complexities of the modern fight for justice. Elon called later that night. "I saw the segment," he said without preamble. James sighed. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for this, Elon. Maybe I should step back and let someone else take the lead." "Don't," Elon said firmly. "You're the heart of this project. You've lived the realities we're fighting against, and you've inspired people in ways I never could." "But I haven't lived their realities," James said quietly. "I've witnessed them, but that's not the same." "I get that," Elon replied. "And you're right. It's not the same. But you've been listening. You've been amplifying voices that need to be heard. That matters." The conversation helped, but the doubts lingered. James decided to seek counsel from someone he trusted, Amara Johnson, a former student who had gone on to become a civil rights lawyer. When Amara arrived at his home the next day, she greeted James with a warm hug. "Mr. Wilson," she said, smiling, "it's been too long." They sat together on the porch as James shared his concerns. Amara listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Wilson," she said after a moment, "you were the first teacher who ever made me feel like I mattered. You believed in me when the world didn't, and now you're doing that for thousands of others. But I understand why people are skeptical. It's not enough to mean well. You have to show people that you're willing to make space for them to share the platform you've been given." James nodded slowly. "What do you suggest?" "Bring in more voices," Amara said. "People from the communities you're trying to help. Let them lead alongside you. You don't have to step back completely, but you can step aside enough to make room." The idea resonated with James, and over the next few weeks, he and Elon worked to expand the leadership of the initiative. They brought in community organizers, healthcare workers, and activists, people who understood the issues firsthand. Amara herself joined as a key advisor, her presence lending both credibility and direction. The criticisms didn't disappear, but the initiative began to feel more grounded, more authentic. And for James, it was a reminder that humility wasn't about stepping away. It was about lifting others up. James Wilson sat alone in his small living room, the faint hum of the old radiator filling the quiet space. Papers and folders covered his coffee table. Budget drafts, meeting notes, letters from families expressing gratitude for having their medical debts erased. But for every message of hope, there seemed to be twice as many critiques, questions, and doubts. It had been months since the initiative had launched, and the pressure was beginning to wear him down. The media scrutiny, the relentless pace of meetings, the need to constantly justify his presence in a movement that wasn't entirely his own. It was exhausting. At times, James wondered if his involvement was helping or hindering. He sighed, leaning back into the threadbare armchair that had been his refuge for years. The phone on the side table buzzed with a text from Elon. "How's it going? Let's touch base tomorrow." No. James stared at the screen for a moment before typing a brief reply. "Sure." He didn't have the energy to explain the doubts swirling in his mind. As the evening stretched on, James felt the weight of the criticism he had faced in recent weeks. The voices on social media were the loudest, accusing him of being out of touch, a relic of an old system that needed to make way for younger, more diverse leadership. He didn't disagree with some of their points. After all, he was an elderly white man at the helm of a movement addressing systemic racial inequities. Who was he to claim authority on these issues? Just as his thoughts began to spiral, there was a knock at the door. James frowned, glancing at the clock. It was nearly 9 p.m. He wasn't expecting anyone. Gripping his cane, he made his way to the door and opened it to find a familiar face. "Amara," he said, startled. Amara Johnson, his former student, and now a prominent civil rights lawyer, stood on his porch. She was dressed casually in a leather jacket and jeans, her hair pulled back into a ponytail. Despite the late hour, her eyes were sharp, her presence commanding. "Can I come in?" she asked, a warm but concerned smile on her face. "Of course," James said, stepping aside. Once inside, Amara took a seat on the couch, glancing at the chaos of papers scattered around. "Looks like you've been busy." James chuckled weakly. Busy trying to keep up. What brings you here, Amara? Surely you've got more important things to do than visit an old man like me. Amara shook her head. You taught me never to say that about someone who's making a difference. And right now, you're making a difference, Mr. Wilson. But I can tell you're struggling. James sighed and sat down across from her. I don't know if I am. Lately, it feels like every step forward is met with 2 steps back. Maybe this whole thing was a mistake. Maybe I'm the wrong person for this. Amara leaned forward, her voice firm but kind. You're not the wrong person. You're the person who started this, who cared enough to do something when others didn't. But I get it. It's hard. And you're facing criticism because people care deeply about these issues. That's not a bad thing. It doesn't feel that way, James admitted. I want to help, but maybe it's time for me to step aside. Let someone else take over. Amara paused, choosing her words carefully. I understand why you feel that way, but stepping aside entirely isn't the answer. What you need is balance. You've already started making room for others, leaders from the communities we're trying to help. That's the right move, but you're still part of this, and your voice still matters. James looked down at his hands, the wrinkles and calluses a testament to decades of hard work. I don't want to overshadow anyone, he said softly. You won't, Amara assured him, because you're willing to listen. That's what makes you different, Mr. Wilson. You don't pretend to have all the answers, and you're not doing this for ego. People see that, even if some don't say it out loud. Her words brought a sense of clarity James hadn't felt in weeks. He nodded slowly. Thank you, Amara. I needed to hear that. Amara smiled. You're welcome. And remember, you're not alone in this. You've got people like me, like Elon, who believe in what we're doing. So lean on us when you need to. That's what we're here for. The two spent the next hour discussing ways to strengthen the initiative, brainstorming ways to ensure more community voices were represented in its leadership and strategy. By the time Amara left, James felt a renewed sense of purpose. The next day, he joined Elon for a strategy meeting and proposed expanding the advisory board to include more activists and healthcare professionals from underrepresented communities. Elon immediately agreed, recognizing the importance of broadening the project's scope and leadership. As the changes were implemented, the backlash began to soften. The initiative grew stronger, more grounded, and more inclusive. For James, it was a reminder that setbacks weren't failures. They were opportunities to learn, adapt, and move forward. And for the first time in weeks, he felt confident that they were on the right path. The years that followed were a testament to the power of persistence, humility, and collaboration. What had started as a random act of kindness in a small-town grocery store had grown into a nationwide initiative. The foundation, now formally named Renewed Hope, had not only erased billions in medical debt, but had become a catalyst for systemic change. James Wilson sat on the porch of the newly built community center named after him, the James Wilson Center for Equity and Hope. It was a warm spring afternoon, and the laughter of children playing in the adjacent park filled the air. The center stood as a symbol of what could be achieved when people work together, a space for education, healthcare access, and community support. At 85, James moved slower than he used to, but his spirit was as vibrant as ever. He held a letter in his hands, one of thousands he had received over the years. This one was from a woman named Rosa, whose family had been one of the first to have their medical debts erased. Dear Mr. Wilson, I wanted to thank you again for what you've done. Because of your work, my family was able to rebuild. My mom started her own small business, and I just graduated from college with a degree in social work. I hope to spend my career helping others the way you helped us. You'll never know how much you've changed our lives. With gratitude, Rosa Jimenez. James's eyes glistened as he folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket. Rosa's words were a reminder of the ripple effect he and Elon had set into motion. Elon arrived a few minutes later, stepping out of a sleek electric car and walking over to join James on the porch. He was dressed casually, his demeanor relaxed. A stark contrast to the driven, restless man he had been when they first met. You're late, James teased, a twinkle in his eye. Elon laughed. Traffic. Even billionaires can't escape it. They sat together watching the children in the park. Hard to believe it's been, 5 years, Elon said. 5 years, James confirmed, nodding. Feels like a lifetime ago, though. Elon leaned back, his gaze thoughtful. Do you ever think about how different things could have been if I hadn't walked into that grocery store that day? James chuckled. I think about it all the time. But life's funny like that, isn't it? One small moment, one decision, and suddenly everything changes. The two men sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in his own thoughts. For Elon, the initiative had been a departure from his usual projects. It wasn't about technology or innovation. It was about humanity. Working with James had reminded him of the value of connection, of using his resources to make an immediate and tangible difference. For James, the journey had given his later years a sense of purpose he hadn't thought possible. It had also taught him that change, even when driven by unlikely allies, was always worth pursuing. The success of renewed hope had inspired similar initiatives across the country. Other philanthropists, corporations, and communities began addressing issues like housing insecurity, educational inequities, and systemic racism. It wasn't a perfect solution. Progress was slow and the challenges were vast. But it was a start. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, James turned to Elon. Do you think it's enough? Elon considered the question for a moment. Enough to fix everything? No. But enough to matter? Absolutely. James nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Then I suppose we've done our part. The children's laughter echoed around them, a chorus of joy and hope. And in that moment, James and Elon understood the true power of their work. Not just the lives they had touched, but the generations they had inspired. The ripple effect would continue far beyond anything they could see or imagine, and that they knew was enough. Thank you so much for watching this story. Your support means everything to us. If you enjoyed it and want to see more inspiring stories like this, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear from you. What time are you watching this video, and where are you tuning in from? Drop a comment below and let us know. It's always amazing to see how far our community reaches. And remember, every share, like, or comment helps us spread these powerful stories to more people. Thanks for being part of this journey, and we'll see you in the next one.